Hi, I'm Don McCarthy, psychotherapist at My Therapy NYC. And My Therapy NYC is a private group practice in the Flatiron neighborhood of Manhattan, NYC. And welcome to my webinar, Snowed Under, How to Survive the Winter Blues and Relieve Seasonal Depression. And I want to start off with a poll question that has popped up on the screen. What do you dislike most about the winter? And I'm going to invite you now to pick one or more of these answers. Shorter days, the cold weather, mood changes, snow, the holidays, the changes in my body, eating habits change, or nothing. I love the winter. And just a reminder that during the webinar, you can type questions or comments in the chat to interact with attendees. And you can also type questions into the chat box. There'll be a Q&A at the end. And the questions will only be sent to the presenter. So if anybody wants to reach out to just the panelists, they can type messages there as well. Okay. So I'm just gonna now share my screen with you. Okay. And you can't, oh, okay. I think we have my audio is okay. Okay. All right. So you can follow us along social media at My Therapy NYC. And again, I'd like to welcome you to my webinar, Snowed Under, How to Survive the Winter Blues and Relieve Seasonal Depression. And in today's webinar, the agenda that we're following here is you're going to learn about some of the signs and symptoms of seasonal depression and anxiety to watch for at this time of the year. Understand the effect that seasonal changes have on our brains and our bodies. Discover some of the causes and who is most affected by seasonal affective disorder. Explore coping strategies and techniques to manage your symptoms. And develop a plan to promote your own personal well-being through the winter months. So I want to take some time to reflect with you. It's February. If you're in New York City like I am right now, outside the wind chill factor is about 20 degrees. But for now, I just want to invite you to take this time and moment with me to compare this time of the year to another time of the year. So imagine, if you will, if we're in the month of July. So maybe you see yourself on the beach or hanging out on your rooftop at night, or perhaps you see yourself walking down the street and you're soaked in sweat. See what you're connecting with as you visualize July, and notice what you're seeing and feeling. Maybe you're feeling the sun on your skin or noticing the hot, humid air. And notice the sensations in your body as you're visualizing what it's like to be in July. And visualizing what it's like to be in the summer again. How does July make you feel? Can you put it into some words now? Now let's take a moment and shift to September. How does being in September make you feel? Imagine seeing the first leaves on the trees as they change from green to red or to orange. And when you see the fall colors, how does that make you feel? What are you noticing in your body as you're visualizing September? Think of the first night in September when you can sleep at night without the air conditioner, putting on a jacket for the first time. How does that make you feel? How does being in September make you feel? What are you noticing? Now compare those feelings coming up for you in those months, and how do you feel now in the month of February? Are you noticing any shifts? You may be noticing something different now. Some people feel more tired at this time of the year. Perhaps you're just noticing that you're annoyed it's February. Sadness, less energy. Many people report feeling physically and emotionally drained at this time of the year, and there's a lot of changes that people feel at this time of the year. So this webinar is about noticing the physical and emotional changes that you may experience during the winter months. And we're going to explore ways to cope and thrive during the season. So first, let's talk about the winter blues and seasonal affective disorder and some of what we know about what causes these conditions. For a lot of us, the winter months are a time of the year when we experience noticeable changes in our well-being and behavior. At one end of the spectrum, some people may experience a few symptoms, such as being irritable, more tired, feeling down, or less motivated with a greater need for sleep. And some of these symptoms show up and appear to be a nuisance, but they're not quite enough to go to a doctor about, but it can make daily living difficult. So this is often referred to as the winter blues. And on the other end of the spectrum, some people feel significant changes in their moods, thoughts, behaviors, and that makes daily living extremely hard. So this is known as seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. And seasonal affective disorder is defined as a type of recurrent major depressive disorder in which episodes of depression occur during the same season each year. So to be diagnosed with SAD, an individual must meet criteria for depression and has suffered from these symptoms for at least 2 or more consecutive seasons. And we're going to talk more about these seasons in a little bit. So during this webinar, I want to share with you one of my clients that I work with, and her name is, I'll call her Mary. And Mary's not her real name, but she uses the pronouns she and her. And over the last few months, Mary noticed that her energy level was starting to slip. And around the month of October, during some of our sessions, Mary shared that she was needing to sleep more and that getting out of bed was harder for her. And so as October progressed into November, she started eating more and eating more junk food and really craving carbs. And this also caused her to gain some more weight. And she was starting to feel some grief around adding on extra pounds. So working from home too during the time of COVID already caused Mary to gain a few pounds. And she shared she wasn't happy with these cravings, and it was affecting her desire to maintain a very healthy weight. And as the holidays approached, Mary recognized that she was, even though during COVID, it may have had some already changes, but she found it very difficult to find the desire and motivation to even participate in some virtual parties or plans with friends and family. She just wasn't feeling motivated. And I mentioned Mary because I like I said, to refer to her from time to time throughout this webinar and highlight some of her experiences. And for example, I picked up on some of the assumptions Mary expressed during our sessions. And I want to share some of those examples with you. And these are some common assumptions that people tend to think when they're experiencing the winter blues. First assumption was everyone feels the way that I do at this time of the year, and they seem to be able to deal with it. So Mary had this assumption that because everyone goes through something like this during the winter months, that she felt like she couldn't complain about it. And as we talked more about it together, we discovered that part of her felt like it was a sign of weakness. And there was a core belief that she is weak, and because she can't overcome these changes like everyone else seems to do, there was something wrong with her. And that also leads to another belief typical at this time of the year. I'm the one to blame for my problems. And because Mary felt like she was too weak to handle the challenges presented to her during the winter months, she blamed herself. And as we discovered, she felt embarrassed and she felt ashamed for not being tough enough. And so as a result, she was led to believe that she wasn't entitled to any real relief because this was all her fault. And another assumption that people typically have when struggling with the winter blues is that this is not a real depression. Some people who already struggle with depression symptoms may dismiss the symptoms that come up simply because it's winter. But in fact, there is a diagnosis for seasonal affective disorder in the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders. So now, who gets sad? Wherever you are in the winter blues spectrum, either on one side and experiencing a few symptoms, or on the other side, experiencing seasonal depression and seasonal affective disorder, I want to share with you some information on who typically suffers from these symptoms. So according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the prevalence of this condition appears to vary with latitude, age, and with gender. So we're going to have a little quiz time. So let's talk about your latitude. Which of these cities would you think would be the ones you would be most likely to find those suffering from symptoms of the winter blues and SAD? A, Los Angeles, B, Miami, C, New York, or D, Boston? And you can feel free to answer in the chat box, and you can have more than one answer. And oh, I see the chat box. I see a lot of people answering. All right. Yeah. All right. All right, so are we ready? I'm going to reveal the answer. If you picked C, New York, and D, Boston, congratulations. You'll be right. The prevalence of the winter blues is much higher in northern cities than in southern cities. And we're going to talk about seasonal changes and the effects that they have on our bodies in a little bit. And just a note, of course, My Therapy NYC is a New York City-based practice, so it makes sense that some of the people in New York City and the surrounding areas watching this webinar right now might be experiencing some winter blues right now. All right. Another question. Which age group do you think is most likely to be at higher risk for SAD? A, people younger than 20, B, people in their 20s to 40s, C, people in their 40s to 60s, or D, people in their 60s and above? I see people answering already in the chat box. Okay, I'm getting various answers. Oh. All right, are we ready for the reveal? B, people in their 20s and 40s. Now, scientists have linked the symptoms we see in the winter blues and SAD to how some hormones in our body respond to the lack of or the reduced amount of sunlight during the winter months. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these hormones in detail in just a bit, but we have one more question. Finally, which gender usually suffers from the winter blues and SAD more than the other? And by gender, I'm referring to biological designation at birth. A, women, or B, men? I see some people answering, and I see letters popping up. Okay. Drum roll, what's the answer? A, women. If you chose A, you'd be correct. And now Scientists have made some links, but there's still not enough conclusive evidence to suggest that changes of the season are linked to fluctuations in the hormones estrogen and progesterone. So that could also explain why the winter blues are more prevalent in people in their reproductive years, generally those in their 20s and 40s or through 40s, versus those who have already experienced menopause. And I just want to mention too that I'm aware that this study only includes cis men and cis women. So it's non-inclusive of transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. So what's making you feel so blue? Biology, psychology, and environment. So we're going into our kind of science-y portion of the webinar, but I will not bore you, I hope. Biology. Some scientists believe that the reduced amount of sunlight during the winter months creates disturbances in our circadian rhythms and an imbalance of the hormones serotonin and melatonin in our bodies. So our body's internal clock reacts to the changes in the amount of light to regulate sleep, mood, and appetite. And now the shorter days and the longer nights of winter can sometimes disrupt this internal clock, and it leaves us feeling sleepy and groggy during the day. And melatonin. So when it's dark, the brain produces the hormone melatonin, and this induces sleep. Sunlight during the day triggers the brain to stop producing melatonin. So the shorter amounts of sunlight and the longer nights of winter will trigger the body to sometimes produce too much melatonin. So that's also why we could be feeling more drowsy and more sleepy, because we have more melatonin. And then serotonin. During winter, the reduction of sunlight during the winter months can lower our body's serotonin production. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that helps us regulate our moods. So a deficit in serotonin may lead to depression and adversely affect our memory, eating habits, sleep cycle, and our sexual desire. Psychology. So there are some studies that suggest that seasonal affective disorder has family roots. So you could sometimes thank your family if you noticed your mother or your aunt or your uncle or your grandparent. Maybe if they seem to be vibrant and energetic during the summer months, and you notice them being less energetic and more withdrawn during the winter months. Are you noticing the same in yourself? Is there a history of depression in your family? So this may indicate that what you're experiencing is similar to what your family, and there's some links to hereditability. Environment, stress. What is happening around you, and do we have the resources to cope with it? Your stress level can make winter blues and sad even worse. So legal problems, financial problems, health problems, relationships, work, being in quarantine, parenting, all of this can feel overwhelming and so challenging. And the more we are stressed and tackling big, important issues in our lives, the less likely that we are going to pay attention to our bodies and notice if we're suffering from the winter blues or feel like we have time to do anything about it. So now that we talked about some of the winter blues and sad and what they are, how can you tell if you're suffering from these conditions? So I'm going to go through some of the symptoms on the winter blues spectrum to take note of. And if you notice a few of these symptoms and could identify them for at least 2 seasons or more, it could signal seasonal affective disorder. So remember, only a medical professional, such as your primary care physician or a psychiatrist, can actually diagnose you with seasonal affective disorder. But some of the symptoms are reduced energy, increased or decreased eating, and carb cravings, if you're noticing you're more interested in eating carbs. Disturbances in sleep or oversleeping, fatigue, lowered sex drive, difficulty concentrating and processing information, downturn in mood, increased irritability, and also suicidal ideation. So just to know, people who have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder are also more prone to seasonal affective disorder. And you could be suffering from major depressive disorder if you have been experiencing the following symptoms of depression. Symptoms like depressed or irritable mood, loss of interest or pleasure, decreased or increased weight or appetite, also a decreased or increased need for sleep, decreased energy or motivation, or feeling worthless or guilty, or poor concentration or indecisiveness, and have been experiencing those symptoms for at least 2 weeks or more. And just a note about suicide that I'd like to share with you. If you or anyone you know are experiencing any of the following warning signs for suicide, it could be an indicator that urgent action is needed. And some of the most common warning signs of suicide are listed here. And I've also provided you with the number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and that hotline is also available 24/7. So what are some effective treatments? What can we do about the winter blues or SAD? So in this slide, a video of Dr. Megan Fang, a primary care doctor at the UW Medicine's South Lake Union Clinic, explains how light therapy and other methods can help.
So this is an example of a light therapy device. Some people call them like happy lights or sad lights. They're all kind of the same thing. You could get something like this online for probably about $30 or so, and it can be a really good way to help treat depression. Let me turn it on for you here. And so that's what it looks like when it's on. Normally what you want to do is turn it on early in the morning, kind of first thing in the morning, usually within 10 minutes of waking up or so. And then you'll kind of just put it off to the side as you're doing some of your daily activities. Maybe you're eating your breakfast, reading the paper, or something like that. And just kind of having it in your vicinity and letting your eyes sort of absorb that light stimuli can be helpful. Seasonal affective disorder is a certain type of depression that affects some people. So it's sort of a subset of depression. And in particular, it comes up during different winter months or summer months for some people actually. But most of the time, people have these symptoms in the winter time. It's hard because a lot of times you wake up in the morning and it's dark, you come home in the afternoon and it's still dark, and then in between it's just kind of gloomy and gray a lot of times. A lot of people come in with concerns about like feeling a little bit down, worried about depression or anxiety. If you think you may be experiencing symptoms of depression, you may want to look into getting a light therapy device. You may also want to try to focus on exercise and being more physically active. And you might want to talk with your doctor about trying medications to see if it will help with your mood. So light therapy is something that people use to try to help re-regulate your body's sleep-wake cycle. And getting that stimulus of bright light in the morning can kind of help reset a little bit of that, which helps to improve your mood. I think the theory behind it is that with the darker days, your sleep-wake cycle can get a little bit irregular because of that you don't have that light stimulus that you get in the summertime. And I've heard many patients kind of say that in the winter months they try to schedule a vacation to go somewhere sunnier or to kind of take a couple days off. And if that's an option for people, I think it's really good. And that can definitely be helpful. Things like sleep, things like physical activity, making sure that you're eating healthy foods, trying to keep up with some social activities and having that interaction with people. None of these things are medications, but can also really affect your mood and are all different tools that you should consider when trying to treat anxiety and depression. More and more, we're kind of recognizing that these are really significant and impactful to people's quality of life. And so it's an important thing to recognize. And I think letting people know that there are different options for treatments is really important.
One of the ways we can also begin to overcome or find strategies for, or one strategy for overcoming the winter blues is acceptance of symptoms. And that's an important step. So how do we do that? Acceptance involves not trying to change how we are feeling, but being in touch with it and taking it for what it is. So accepting our more negative emotions like anxiety, shame, or fear, and that is linked to us thriving psychologically. And acceptance can blunt our more negative emotional reactions to stressful events and help us lead into action. So Mary and I worked on some of her fears and the fear that she had about what her seasonal mood change said about herself. And we made space to accept some of the fears she had and to acknowledge that she was really sick and it wasn't her fault. One book that I'd like to recommend too is a book called Winter Blues Survival Guide. And inside this book, there is a self-assessment that has been developed by Dr. Norman Rosenthal. And the assessment is called How Seasonal Are You? And it's not only found in the book, but it's also found on an online article in Psychology Today. But just a note, before taking this assessment, it's important to remember that self-assessment is not meant to diagnose or replace any kind of evaluation by a doctor. But it can be important and an informative tool for you in bringing awareness to what you experience and in making the right decisions for yourself. So now I'd like to share the results of our poll with you. And wow, okay. So what do you dislike most about winter? The shorter days, 60%, cold winter, 57%, mood changes, 33%, snow, 17%, the holidays, 7%, changes in my body, 19%, eating habits change, 24%, or 12% of you, nothing, I love winter. Great, thank you for taking the time to take the poll. So now that we talked about some of the symptoms and looking at some of the results from our poll, I want to share with you some tips to relieve these symptoms. Okay, so let's talk about creating your own plan and ways that you can survive and thrive during the winter months with a few simple strategies. One way, some immediate relief tips, one of the first ways is increasing access to light. So those of you who are noticing a dip in energy or feeling more tired or feeling more of a need for sleep, figure out how to get more light into your home. Or maybe it makes sense to take short walks outside during the day. Even if you walk outside for at least 20 minutes, that can make a noticeable difference in how you're feeling. And maybe light therapy can make sense for you. Plan a winter vacation if possible. So for those of you affected by snow or the changes in changes in weather, or just the lack of sunlight, do you do better in the summer months? Would planning a trip to Florida, the Caribbean, or southern locations help? Now, I recognize in COVID times, traveling can be risky, and it makes sense to take into consideration that if you would like to travel, additional precautions may need to be taken. And the CDC offers considerations for travel on their website. Say no or limit to some obligations. So if you're prone to stress, put up some healthy boundaries. You can't give more than you physically or emotionally can handle. And so give yourself space to rest and relax whenever you need to. Meditation, the benefits of meditation have shown to be beneficial to relieving some symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, and they can improve your mood. Plan and or prepare daily meals and snacks. So for anyone experiencing changes in their appetites, to help combat the cravings and make unhealthy food choices, take some time to plan a menu for the week. So maybe prepare your dinners and lunches ahead of time, keep them in the fridge, keep healthy snacks on hand, and maybe you can designate one day a week where you can have a cheat dessert so you don't feel like you're depriving yourself. Make a list of activities you do enjoy in the winter and do them. For those of you who notice mood changes, do you like cooking, making hot chocolate, knitting, skiing, snowboarding, or are you the creative type? Do you like drawing or painting? Sometimes these activities can have enormous benefits. And remember earlier when we talked about the effects of stress on SAD. In my next clip that I like to share with you, this is a clip from an artist and art therapist, Erica Peng. So it's shortened just to focus on the activity, but in the beginning, Erica sets up some of the personal stress that she has been feeling and how this activity has not only been beneficial in relieving her stress, but improving her overall mood and getting her creative juices flowing.
So I created this really simple therapeutic art exercise for you to help you relieve stress, to help you let it out in a fun, creative, and cathartic way. You're just going to need really simple supplies. All you need is a piece of paper, pencil, pencil crayon, and some felt markers. Release all your stress out on paper. Write it, draw it, scribble it, let it all come out. Start by writing anything you feel stressed about. Your finances, your relationship, your family, just write it out. Now choose some colors and start to make your marks. What does stress look like? What kind of shape and line is it? Try pressing harder and see what it feels like. Let it out. When you're finished, take a deep breath in and a big sigh out. You've released what you needed to release. It's all out on paper now. Just breathe. Now face your drawing, put your hands on it and look right into it. Start to crumple it up with your hands into a ball. Squeeze it, let out the tension. Massage it, let it get softer and softer. Feel that with every squeeze, you're letting go of more and more stress. Keep playing with it like a stress ball. Now start to rip it up. Feel the paper getting lighter and lighter with every rip. Keep ripping it. Release. Rip it until you feel like you've relieved enough stress for today. Let yourself feel the lightness in this moment right now.
All right, some other ways that we can overcome winter blues and seasonal affective disorder is to be proactive. Put a plan together in the summer. Doctors, therapists, equipment, changing environments. So one of the ways you can combat the winter blues or seasonal affective disorder is start planning ahead and get proactive. During the summer, get your list together of your medical professional team, primary care physician, psychiatrist, therapist. Have appointments lined up in advance if possible. And does light therapy make sense for you? So get an idea of what month makes the best sense for you to start using the equipment. Starting treatment early, what month do you notice your symptoms start? See your doctor in September if that's the month that you start noticing some of the symptoms. Make your vacation plans early if possible. And can you take a week off in February? Sometimes looking forward to Florida or the destination of your choice can be a nice anchor, and it can ground you to look forward to something in the winter months. Begin with easy treatments. So do some trial and error, see what works best for you. See what, most importantly, doesn't work for you either. My client, Mary, hated the gym. And I know I might get in trouble with some personal trainers, but it's okay to hate the gym. And if that's the case, then find some form of exercise you can do and that you do like in your own home or in your own space or with friends or outside. Add treatments as needed. So recognize when new symptoms appear. So when January and February roll around, you may notice an increase in the number or the intensity of some of these symptoms. So this may be a good time to recognize this, and you may need to add treatment. So for example, maybe the light therapy didn't quite work in October or November, but perhaps it's more effective for you in February. And month to month, create a plan for more details if it helps give a peace of mind. So for example, how do you deal with snow? Does snow and ice get me down, or do I enjoy it? Will snow activities lift my mood? Am I a skier? Do I like snowboarding? What about the holidays? Are you going to see family, or do you need to plan a holiday where you're going to only see a few people? Anniversaries. Perhaps getting in touch with what are some of the physical problems that may pop up in the winter, and does it make sense to make a doctor's appointment in January? I am going to open up some of the questions and answers now. And I am going to see some of the questions in the Q&A box that people have left. All right, I see one question. What can I do if I have a family member who has the winter blues? I would say, how are they sleeping? How are they eating? Are you noticing if they're having trouble concentrating? Tell them that you've noticed some of these changes, and listen non-judgmentally in a validating way. Maybe sit with them, let them know that you're listening. And remember when I shared with you some of the common assumptions people have during the winter months, or have when they have winter blues, like my client Mary. Are you noticing that they're maybe having some of those assumptions as well? So can you help your family member in normalizing their experience? Another question, what kind of impact has the pandemic had on seasonal depression? So yes, the pandemic has created a lot of stress for us all. And remember, stress creates the hormone cortisol, and it does have an effect on our physical and our mental health. So it makes sense that the pandemic appears to be intensifying or perhaps increasing the amount of symptoms of seasonal depression in people. So some of the ways that can help reduce the amount of cortisol in our bodies is limiting the amount of caffeine or sugar we are consuming. Meditation, yoga, exercise also help in lowering stress levels. Also humor. Maybe watching a funny TV show or a movie can also reduce cortisol levels and improve our moods. Another question, what are some daily habits that can help me with my winter blues? Do something you enjoy every day. Having fun is a terrific stress reducer. So make some time for the activities that bring you joy. Maybe it's painting, playing the piano, working on a crossword puzzle, simply hanging out with friends on Zoom, or in a setting that you feel safe during the pandemic. And let's see. Okay, how many of the symptoms on the list for seasonal affective disorder do you need to have in order to be diagnosed with SAD? That's a good question. So I would definitely more than 4 or 5 of them at least, and for 2 consecutive seasons. If you're noticing that the last 2 winters or more, you're noticing at least 4 or 5 of these symptoms, I would say it's worth going to a doctor or going to get checked out. And just to also on a side note, sometimes people do have these symptoms in spring or summer. So the same would be true if it was spring or summer. So uh, for the winter blues or for seasonal affective disorder, just if you're noticing any of these symptoms, at least 4 or 5, and noticing it this year, last year, and previous years, I would say go get checked out. I see another question. Do you have any tips or tools to talking about your own winter blues with others you are close to? Ah, um, yeah, I would say that, yeah, if you feel like you are experiencing these symptoms, remember that we were talking about some of the assumptions. Are the assumptions coming up for you? Are you feeling any negative feelings toward yourself? And if you are, maybe it would be helpful to kind of just talk it out with somebody that you trust. Maybe if you start with some of the symptoms that you're noticing that maybe you're more comfortable talking about, like just, I'm just feeling like more sleepy, or I just can't get out of bed. Or maybe if you're comfortable with a partner or a loved one, maybe if you want to even also invite them, are you noticing anything about myself? Or if you're noticing that I have changes, I'm kind of feeling this way, have you noticed it as well? I had tried, oh, okay. Um, oh, okay, so I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the questions that are popping up. I had tried a light therapy a few times, lamp in the past, but didn't think it really worked. I may try one again, though, as there are some recommended ones that are pretty expensive. Do you have experience with the lamps yourself or have an opinion as to their effectiveness? Also, I was told insurance may cover a lamp, so we'll look into that. Thanks. I can't say I have my own experience with lamps or recommendations, but for those of you who are registered with this webinar, I will also be providing resources and emails, and I can also suggest too, there are some wonderful resources on YouTube about light therapy, not only from the doctor that I showed you in the webinar, but also there may be other wonderful suggestions as well. Will pandemic affective disorder ever be a thing? Kidding, but seriously, I had always associated SAD with winter blues, but according to the doctor in the Happy Light video, it sounded like it can be summer too. So how is it different than just normal depression, if so? So that's a interesting question. So yes, we can experience seasonal depression in summer. It's not as common as winter depression, but people have experienced symptoms such as the ones that I described during the webinar during the summer months as well. It's very similar to depression. I think this is a good, also, if you are experiencing depressive symptoms, if you're noticing for at least 2 weeks or more, you want to also maybe have a discussion with your doctor or psychiatrist or therapist that maybe there's also something about looking into major depressive disorder for yourself. So I think the difference too would be if you notice that you are improving, let's say March, April rolls around and some of these symptoms aren't affecting you as much, could be an indicator that it's mostly a seasonal depression. Seasonal depression come in waves, or is it usually fairly constant? Some people experience seasonal depression in ways, it worsens in some of the months, like maybe, for example, January or February. And there can be times where people have noticed that maybe that they're only having a few of the symptoms, and then a few more pop up and then some dissipate as well. So I would say they can fluctuate from what I've read and from what I've researched. So, and that might be also a good indicator too, like if you are, like, for example, using light therapy, or maybe noticing that some of it isn't working as well in one month as the other month. So it may be an indicator that maybe it's something worth trying if you're noticing symptoms are getting worse, or maybe also too, if you're working with a psychiatrist, is talking to a psychiatrist or your doctor about medication. Um, can that be helpful as well? Are there any support groups for other individuals experiencing SAD? I I'm not familiar with any groups, but I would be happy to provide any resources or or provide any information about that. I believe if you look on, actually, come to think of it, if you look on NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, I believe that there is some information about groups on their website. That I believe is one resource, but I would also be happy to provide more in detail through email if you are interested. Also, how are those light therapy lamps different than normal household lighting? So that's a good question. So from what I understand, one of the, like, for example, the lamp that was shown during the clip, and there's others that I've seen that are also similar looking to desk lamps. I believe that there's a different type of light bulb or something within the light itself. So it's not exactly something that you would use for reading or for any other purposes than literally just to have close to your face and to be have turned on. I've seen some people or some videos where people will be sitting at their desk, working at their desk, and they have the light maybe a couple feet away on their desk, and it's it's not a, yeah, like I said, it's not a reading light, but it's a noticeable light. And from what I understand, from what I have seen, I think some people have put it on for 10, 15, or 20 minutes. And it can be very convenient. So you can actually be working from your desk or doing something in your home, wherever you're comfortable, and have the light close to you. So it's not something too that you have to do separately from your daily routine. All right, so I want to thank you for joining me and watching this webinar this evening. And I just want to mention that you can check us out at mytherapynyc.com. And we also have therapists that work with individuals and couples. And in March, we will be running some new groups. So you want to check out our website and see what groups we offer and our therapists on staff. And anybody that is seeing this video tonight, this webinar tonight, will receive a recording and a list of resources following the webinar. And you can also find us on our social media at mytherapynyc. And if you want to email me, my work email is don@mytherapynyc.com if you have any further questions. And I want to thank you. It's been my pleasure to share this information with you this evening.